Session 490. Deleted. Rob noted, before the session, I asked a question that Seth answered as soon as the session began. Seth said, "Good evening." Now, there are no karmic influences that necessitate the particular physical condition. Rob noted in Jen. Seth said, there are tendencies and conflicts that have been with the personality in other existence, that have influenced his nature as he vacillated between spontaneity, usually exaggerated, and over-discipline. In some lives, a great lack of concern for the welfare of others. That could be called an innocent carelessness, a joyful, utterly spontaneous personality with little idea of practicality. He died once simply as a result of acting without thought, forethought, on the impulse of the moment. He was murdered for an act of pure thoughtlessness, of impulse. He determined to discipline himself much more carefully from then on. But from this point, he threw himself wholeheartedly for two lives, into lives of great restraint and over-control. Fear, of course, was the motive behind this iron discipline. In the last life, as a medium, he had swung somewhat to the other side again, deliberately not using his intellect and giving the spontaneous portions full play. He was open-hearted, rather childishly vain, the emotional pattern quickly moving from joy to tears. With all of this, he helped many, and died at an old age. Other portions of the personality, while recognizing this, still felt that the personality as a whole needed to impose some restraints upon what it regarded as flamboyantly spontaneous qualities. Therefore, it chose a highly restrictive early environment. It chose a parent whose emotions were highly unrestrained, so that the parent's action could serve as a constant reminder of its own flamboyant emotions. It chose an environment where hardship would automatically teach a certain discipline, and yet one in which the psychic nature of the circumstances would also permit intuitive creative growth. In fact, the controls were applied precisely in proportion to the intuitive gifts. The purpose was to set up a situation in which both strong facets of the personality could emerge. The intellectual, reasoning, rather practical and controlling aspects, hand in hand with the highly volatile, creative, spontaneous portions. Now, give me a moment here. The religious element in one way or another has always been a strong one. It has at one time or another in various lives been on the side of the strongly disciplined portions, in which case it was greatly given to dogma and concerned with cultural problems of punishment and law, or followed the intuitive side, in which it emerged as mediumship and highly mysticism. So these important elements merge at this point. It is the first time, so to speak, that the personality seriously tried to merge them. And yet for prime development and fulfillment, this had to be accomplished. The personality regards this as a challenge of the highest order, but strengths naturally developed. Give us time here. I will, at your request, at any time, give you the details of these lives. This evening, I am answering the question. I believe most important and the details will follow. I will not put you off on this. Now, In this life until very recently, the personality has been involved with highly charged, volatile emotional personalities. He worked up a proportional degree of energy to ward off their influence. It was necessary that he learn how to do this. Do you follow me? Rob said, yes. Seth said, in so doing, he learned to understand his own emotional nature, how to direct its energies, and how to use it as a source of creativity and psychic and spiritual accomplishment. Now, we are going to give you a short break, but we will leave our friend in abeyance, half in and half out. Rob noted, humorously. Seth said, he has used his symptoms to some degree as a checking point. Before, the presence of his mother and those surroundings act as both restraints on over spontaneity and as aids for the growth of creativity. Do you follow me here? Rob said, yes. Seth said, now, when these were released, when he left the initial environment, he ran willy-nilly. He felt. He tended to be ruled more than he would prefer by emotionalism. At this point, he began to rely upon you somewhat as a controlling factor. Since he felt you were more given to reason and control, when you became ill, he realized that no other human being could be used in such a way. He also felt, as mentioned earlier, that emotionalism on his part brought you ill fortune in Florida. The part-time job at the gallery for a while became a controlling factor, preventing him from dealing with the creative self on a full-time basis. The psychic development was one of the main issues of importance he had been waiting for, and several circumstances had to be met first. He had to be in fairly dependable circumstances, fairly permanent surroundings. There had to be a strong need to propel the development as impetus. These were met. Once the development occurred, however, the personality knew it would now have to face the main issue, how to handle its own creativity and find a comfortable balance between spontaneity and discipline. It could have been clear sailing from therein. Unfortunately, several episodes frightened him enough so that he felt again the need for controls. Now, here is one nice little point. Rupert's mother, as mentioned earlier, had often told him that if he kept on as he was going, he would lose his mind. And the contact with psychologists, when he feels they are testing him, brings up this old issue. Now, I could not tell you, for the personality had set up its own guards in the realm of personal material. The old in-string data enters into this. Now, Rupert's mother was not there to serve as a restraining element. You would no longer act in that role. Moreover, Rupert did not feel it proper to project that role upon you any longer. Therefore, the symptoms were adopted. Mimicking the mother's symptoms was the next best thing to having the presence of the mother as a control against the spontaneity. The long series of in-string tests were involved here, and yet they were also necessary, since the issue had to be met and faced in one manner or another. Bernard did not operate as a psychologist. Rupert thought of him as being on his side, and there was no hint of accusation in Bernard's attitude. Now, I was not able to give you any information, particularly at that time. But this did have something to do with my rather vehement recording, which I hoped would have the effect of discouraging Dr. Instream. I could not, however, shield Rupert in all of his activities in any case. He would have to face the problem, and if it was circumvented in one way, it could have returned at a later date. You have, I believe, the reason for the symptoms now, as clearly as it can be given. Give us time. Rupert interpreted Instream's final attitude to mean that the psychologist had more or less by implication justified the mother's frequent warning. The affair was not to be taken seriously as a psychic phenomenon, and Rupert, with his either-or attitude, then decided that it was time to apply controls. The symptoms had begun, however, before that time, but lightly. He also felt that you had adopted symptoms earlier, somewhat that as a system of controls, that you were so emotionally upset. You didn't know what to do, and therefore put yourself in a position where you could do little of importance. You could not make errors. Since he had temporarily put you in the role of a controlling factor, this was also in the back of his mind. You emerged whole and hearty, and so should he. The issues were not identical, you see, but similar enough in his mind. Do you want to rest your fingers? Ralph said, yes. Seth said, now, we are going to keep on with this to get all the important points out while conditions are good. The symptoms initially were claimed on in panic. 1 or 2 poor test results frightened him. This, of course, added to the other issues. The purpose, however, was twofold again. The development of an environment in which controls would be there. The symptoms taking the place in this case of the mother's restrictive presence, and the comparative isolation in the house. The comparative solitude that he felt was necessary then for the emergence of the creative abilities. Both of these you see existing in the child environment. Otherwise, he felt he might fritter his energy away. At the same time, he was afraid of it for the reasons given, and felt it was best to handle it in an environment of applied controls. Give us time. He did not count upon the body's response. He was terrified of the vulnerability to pain. And yet, he felt the ability to face and handle the pain was something he would run away from otherwise. That he had done everything to avoid it, and that it was one of life's physical realities that he had refused to admit. So he felt a taste of it would not hurt him. He also felt it would help him understand to some extent his mother's actions, and rid him of the hatred he had of her. Now, give us time. The problem, as he said it in the framework he made for it, was quite literally huge. He also wanted to understand the effect of mind on matter. He did not really believe, intellectually, what I told him, that you form your own reality, and he felt that the symptoms would also help. He did not get his symptoms to test my theories. Understand? Do you follow me? Ralph said, yes. Seth said, give us time. He was quite appalled at the conditions once he had set them up. He did not realize until he went through it how this kind of strain reacts on the body. When he began to realize this, the inner plan had already been put into effect, and at the time of worst symptoms, he literally could not withdraw quickly. Many processes had to be reversed.
This realization then threw him into panic, reinforcing the symptoms. Now, give us time. Your father's condition frightened him because of the mother's old suggestions of losing the mind, and of course, the nursing home environment that represents to him the mother's environment. I am searching for pertinent information, so bear with me. The matter of speaking the opposite of what he means to say. This always occurs when he makes an innocuous remark that is meant to cover up a repressed feeling. The remarks are again harmless ones, usually a lie or two of pointless conversation. Chatter meant to cover up a thought that has briefly come into consciousness and been repressed. Rob noted, just before I sat down to resume typing this session, Jen made such a remark about the food she was giving one of our cats for supper. They said, the use of the opposite is simply to tell him that he is not meaning what he says, that the remark, usually a pleasant one, is covering up an unpleasant feeling. What you have now is a residue in the body of conflict, representing mental conflict, when at the same time, the muscles are being given signals to let go completely, and also signals to tense, signals of control. They work against themselves then. Give us time. In the arms, this causes knots, as if you knot up a cord, it becomes shorter and pulls, so that the arms are pulled upwards. The tension and the lack of relaxation causes a lessening of lubricating fluid in the joints. Now, this also causes a lack at times of lubricating fluid in the female organs, which is why lubber will turn away, as you mentioned. The psychocybernetics that I have mentioned, what he does them properly, make him smile, reducing tension in the facial and the neck areas. Good relaxation is extremely important, where the muscles are let go as far as possible. Physical activity of a fairly steady variety is good. Both are needed. One evening dancing, he tried consciously too hard, so that he tensed the muscles as he was trying to use them, and there was a physical result then. Now, the point is, he no longer needs the controls. Understand that the whole situation, on a very deep basis, was protective as it tried to reproduce to some extent, though to a far lesser extent. Those early conditions that allowed for the controlled and disciplined growth of strong creative abilities. He chose a marked version of those early restraints. Now, the controls are no longer necessary. The reasons are given in this evening session should make him realize that. The physical symptoms now remaining are a direct result of these contradictory messages being given. One relax, let go. The other wait. Now, not so fast. Slow up. The controls were actually adopted in fear against the insanity threatened by his mother, and the implications that he felt implied in the ensuing affair. He did not, for example, fear he was insane, but he felt the need once more to control the spontaneity. Your father's condition, as always, had these implications, and it did not escape him that your father, in his mental condition, is put in a wheelchair and restrained forcibly. In other words, Rupert restrained himself ahead of time. Give us time. He has been letting the symptoms go, as he has become aware of emotional stabilities. He has let them go slowly. Now, how will you behave if I give you this much more freedom? And a little more. You see? Give us time. For him, now the idea of a long trip is a daring adventure. Does he really have the freedom to go so far? Rob asked, "Is it okay to go to Saratoga this weekend?" Seth said, "Earlier this evening, when you were speaking of the weekend, he mentioned 2 days, and you said Sunday. He interpreted this to mean that you did not think he had the freedom to travel as far as a 2-day trip." Rob noted, "This was not what I meant by my remark. I was rather briefly considering expense. Actually, we did go to Saratoga on June 28th and 29th, 1969. They said, "Again, we are trying to search for all pertinent points. There are still a few issues, and I am trying to get at them. His writing schedule, as he knows, should be maintained. He punishes himself with symptoms when it is not. The symptoms then become an issue for the next few days. That prevents him to some extent from carrying out the schedule. It can be flexible, but he operates well within it and can use it as an aid. The depressions are also caused when he overemphasizes control and smothers spontaneity. Now, the writing schedule provides 2 needs, both control and spontaneity, and is therefore comfortable. A circle is set up. An overemphasis on control leads him to a depression, which interferes with his writing schedule. This brings on symptoms, which further impede the schedule. He feels then that he is accomplishing nothing, and this period ends this cycle with a depression like the one in the beginning of the cycle, in that he usually manages through discussion with you or psycho-cybernetics to break the cycle and initiate a period of fair balance. And the symptoms are minimized, and decent improvement shows. Continuing the writing schedule, regardless, would automatically break the cycle in half, even if it began, for the resulting feeling of lack of achievement would not result. Do you want to rest? Rob said, "Yes." "Now, about our going to Saratoga this weekend?" They said, "We will get into that. Tell me when you are ready." They said, "Are you ready?" Rob said, "Yes." They said, "Now, the difficulty in the morning follows those days when he feels he has not put in his writing time, and he does not realize this. He projects that day of relative failure into the next day, and experiences symptoms and feelings of helplessness upon awakening. Now, some practical suggestions. One I mentioned earlier. Remember that many symptoms have vanished. He should be on the alert for restrictive statements, vocal or mental. I can't, for example. I had better go slowly, or mental pictures of that nature. Such thoughts automatically tense the muscles. If he is consciously adding instructions to relax on top of this, he worsens the situation, for the muscles cannot relax and contract at once. When he says to himself, "This arm or whatever is tight," while he consciously tells it to relax, he is also confusing the muscles. Do you follow me? Rob said, yes. Seth said, his conscious mind, when he is not writing, should be anchored on something. There is too much unrecognized free brooding when he sits doing nothing consciously, waiting perhaps for inspiration, but not in a positive way. He will know to what periods I am referring. Now that I am pointing it out, he should have a painting in progress as a hobby, or save for such times, or do household activities. His mind, his conscious mind, is the type that should be anchored in such a way, for it is overactive, otherwise, and when he is not at his best, it will lead to brooding. He lets this go by. Now, the Saratoga issue is clear. If you drive past his old house, he should tell himself that he no longer needs it, or what it stands for, that he can retain good memories of it. It will be very easy for him to think of the town as the place where his grandfather lived, and this will bring about the beneficial aspects. It reassures him, however, to know that the town is still there, that he is free to go to the town, and free to leave it. Symbolically, this is important. It is important to go so that he is free to leave. Do you follow me? Rob said, yes. Seth said, it is also good for him to see that it has changed, that it exists in the present, along with his own adulthood. And you can remind him of this. Even his mother, you see, has left the town. Now, do you have questions? Rob said, no, I guess not. Seth said, we will then close the session, and my best wishes to your fingers.
The information should prove quite valuable. Rupert did not feel he was mature enough to handle his abilities. Tell him that I am saying that he is. He can quite literally relax with them now, and with himself. He can quite literally let down, and a hearty good evening. Rob said, good evening, Seth. Rob noted, the trip to Saratoga was a great success, and Jen did experience many of the ideas, realizations, feelings, detailed above by Seth